The year is 1954. You're a lonely man in San Francisco. A man of means, perhaps, but not connections. It's late, a cool autumn evening, and you might be willing to pay for some company. Be warned, however, because that kind of company, though easily found, is not easily vetted in San Francisco in 1954. If you're committed to this act, take caution and choose your partner wisely, or before you know it, you might find your sanity, slowly at first and then all at once beginning to slip away. Just like that, you're caught in the clutches of Operation Midnight Climax. Throughout our collective journey, often hidden from the public eye, events have transpired that, when examined, rob us of our sense of security, serenity, or sanity. I'm Eliot Junipero, and this is Seek and Be Found. Operation Midnight Climax was a set of highly unethical CIA-led experiments that took place largely in 3 safe houses turned brothels in the mid-1950s. Victims, hereafter referred to as test subjects, were lured, tricked, or otherwise enticed to follow escorts, government payroll escorts, I would add, back to these safe houses. Once there, they would surreptitiously dose them with substances, mainly LSD, in order to study the effects of the drug and its potential as a truth serum or mind control device. This clandestine brain science was all the rage in the 50s, and Midnight Climax received tens of thousands of dollars of government funding, from 1953 to 1966. At a time when the US was racing to beat the Soviets to new frontiers in space, and fighting proxy wars all around the globe, there was plenty of political willpower to spare for journeys inside the noggin. Informed consent be damned. No self-respecting government spook was willing to fall behind the socialists in the battle for the mind. Anything to close the gap. What is it like to slide headfirst into an acid trip you're not expecting? What you experience while your body is processing any hallucinogenic substance is determined in large part by what the psychonaut community refers to as your set and setting. That is, the mindset you carry with you and the setting carrying you, your environment and surroundings. When taken with care and intentionality, psychedelics can be enjoyable and even therapeutic. When abused, when an element of your set or setting is amiss, your lived experience can begin to spiral, leading to what's commonly referred to as a bad trip. During a psychedelic experience, your brain lights up like a signal flare. Unused and forgotten neural pathways reforge themselves. Connections between different regions of the brain strengthen and intensify, and signals that have long since carved a singular pathway, as the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon out of the Mojave, breach their banks and find novel ways to transit your gray matter. This interconnectedness is frequently experienced as a universal oneness, a discovery of a buried self, or a vaguely linked string of eureka moments, as the cogs of your pattern recognition machine slip and catch in new and interesting ways. Not coincidentally, a vaguely linked string of eureka moments can also describe paranoia, manic confusion, and psychosis. Though we have little surviving documentation about what the subjects of Midnight Climax experienced, considering the context of the psychedelic takeover of their consciousness, it's safe to say they were likely not having a great time. There were 3 different research labs under the umbrella of Midnight Climax. One was a pair of apartments in New York, and two were locations in the Bay Area of California, one in Marin and one in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill district. Most of what we know about the operation today centers around 225 Chestnut Street, San Francisco, California, the Telegraph Hill location. George White was the architect of this operation's day-to-day. He had a narcotics background and some prior experience with the CIA's brain work thanks to a liquid marijuana mob boss dosing scheme in 1943, which looked like a real resume booster to Project MKUltra's leading man, Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb brought White in to head up Midnight Climax, and after a brief stint in New York's Greenwich Village, White shipped off to California, where he would rent a cute little apartment on Chestnut Street. He would quickly turn that cute little apartment into his very own take on a French whorehouse. Not, in fact, a derogatory after-the-fact descriptor, but rather an overt and intentional goal. One agent close to the operation is quoted saying it was supposed to look rich, but it was furnished like crap. Due to the nature of the operation, much of the money in the budget was untracked and unaccounted for. And it sounds like being a convincingly plush sanctuary was not high on the list of priorities. The walls were adorned with an image of a go-go dancer, erotic paintings by French artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, and very tasteful BDSM photography. One wall of the brothel space was fitted with a two-way mirror, behind which White could be found squatting. This research lab's observation deck was a cramped space, fitted with a portable toilet for theater seating, and a refrigerator, where White would keep his martini pitcher for the show. There aren't a lot of good ways to hide a two-way mirror effectively in residential apartment space, and all things considered, the cheap furnishings, the conspicuous slab of mirror in the wall, the erotic art, and the cigar smoke-filled air heavily implied by all of the above, it was likely a highly convincing 1950s California cat house. So let's examine what we know so far about the moment the drug would have begun to take effect in light of the principle of set and setting. You have a man in the midst of post-coital mental clarity in a seedy, unfamiliar environment. You have a companion who may or may not have stuck around for the show, but with whom you've gone from complete stranger to intimate acquaintance within the span of an hour. You have the occasional sound of dripping martini sneaking from the corner of the hidden government agent's mouth as he quaffs inconspicuously and directly from a pitcher, behind a wall where you can see your own reflected shame. It's hard to quantify the psychological damage incurred in the minds of the subjects of Midnight Climax, especially because many of the records initially retained from the project were destroyed in a purge during the 70s. What we know today has been pieced together from the scraps that remain. There are, however, other examples of non-consensual dosing that we have more specific information on, and the trauma can be extreme. In 1953, just prior to Midnight Climax, one example stands out, that of Frank Olson. Olson was himself a CIA biochemist, but what he's most remembered for today is falling victim to Sidney Gottlieb's CIA psychoneurobiolochemistry machine devouring one of its own. The CIA was cooperating with the Army Chemical Corps' Special Operations Division, and Gottlieb and Olson found themselves together at a special joint retreat in Maryland. By this time, Gottlieb was already deep into his dosing hobby, and he came to the retreat prepared with LSD on hand, which he slipped into a bottle of Cointreau for dessert. Olson was not the only one affected, but his reaction was by far the most intense. He grew paranoid and agitated. His colleagues at the retreat, themselves giggly with psychedelic rapture, became bullies in his mind. He felt himself the butt of every unspoken joke, and this sense of disrespect would gnaw at his psyche long after the initial dose had begun to wear off. He returned home to his wife in an unusual state, refusing to share details of what had transpired there. Planning to resign, he returned to work the next day, but was convinced otherwise by his boss. They connected with a doctor, Harold Abramson, himself a grant recipient under the umbrella of MKULTRA and a close colleague of Gottlieb's, who prescribed alcohol and barbiturates. Having been left alone with this medication in a hotel room, Olson, his mind still damaged from its psychological psychedelic tampering, would be found the next day after wandering the streets all night in a drug-induced stupor. This supervised mental crisis would continue for some months, culminating in another hotel room incident that would ultimately leave Olson dead after plummeting from a 10th-story window the night before Thanksgiving. This may be one source of LSD's reputation as a psychosis-inducing drug with a penchant for induced autodefenestration. It's worth noting, however, that the impact on Olson's psyche from the drug cannot be divorced from the impact of his set and setting. And it's also worth noting that many of the details surrounding his supposed suicide are suspect, and his vertical journey may not have been voluntary at all. With 13 years of untold and forgotten incidents similar in nature to the circumstances that led to Olson's unwinding, what scientific bounty was gleaned from the conclusions of Midnight Climax? As far as we can tell, the scientific value of these experiments, uncontrolled and lacking in protocol or rigor, was essentially zero. For all of the taxpayer dollars that funded Midnight Climax, the value returned was 13 years of voyeuristic fun for George White, and a cautionary tale about what happens when ethics in science and government are set aside in the name of progress. I'm Eliot Junipero, and this has been Seek and Be Found.